Roots, contents, export Nile and Niger. An analytical report on the correlations between Kemetic, Yoruba, and Igbo civilizations. Section 1. Introduction. Framing the Inquiry into African Civilizational Continuity 1.1. The central question, connection or coincidence. The inquiry into the historical and cultural correlations between the civilization of Kemet, ancient Egypt, and the later West African civilizations of the Yoruba and Igbo peoples addresses one of the most profound and contentious questions in African history. It posits Kemet not merely as an ancient wonder, but as a foundational African civilization, a potential root from which other continental cultures may have drawn sustenance. This report seeks to move beyond simplistic affirmations or denials of influence, undertaking instead a complex, interdisciplinary exploration of the remarkable parallels and significant divergences that characterize these three great African societies. The central question is not whether these civilizations are connected, but rather the nature, depth, and mechanisms of that connection. Is it the product of direct migration, the diffusion of ideas along ancient pathways, a shared inheritance from a far more ancient common source, or the coincidental result of independent societies responding to universal human imperatives? To navigate this complex terrain, this analysis will engage with three primary schools of thought that have sought to explain these correlations. The diffusionist/migrationist hypothesis. This school of thought, advanced by early Yoruba historians like Reverend Samuel Johnson and scholars such as J. Olamide Lucas, posits a direct transmission of culture and in some versions populations from the Nile Valley westward into what is now Nigeria, by normal proximity from a cruise. The comparative priorities of people from the Yor population posits a direct transmission of culture, and in some versions populations from the Nile Valley westward into what is now Nigeria. Caucasian populations from the Nile Valley westward into what we now know as Nigeria. The declined Caucasian populations from the Nile Valley westward into what we now. This model often interprets West African oral traditions of Eastern origins as literal historical accounts of a journey from Egypt. The shared African substratum theory, championed by seminal figures like the Senegalese scholar Cheikh Anta Diop. This theory argues for a deep, underlying cultural and linguistic unity across Black Africa. In this view, Kemet is not necessarily the mother of West African cultures, but rather their most prominent and earliest recorded sibling. The observed similarities are thus evidence of a shared genetic and cultural heritage from a common Paleo-African source, making Kemet a classical point of reference for a fundamentally unified African civilization. The independent, Genesis/convergent evolution theory. This perspective, which represents the prevailing view in mainstream Western academia, emphasizes the indigenous development of the Yoruba and Igbo civilizations. It attributes parallels with Kemet to several potential factors: the influence of more localized intra-West African interactions, convergent evolution, where different societies independently develop similar solutions to similar social or environmental challenges, or universal archetypes common to human societies worldwide. it critically points to the lack of direct archaeological evidence for a Nile to Niger migration as a fundamental weakness of diffusionist models. The debate surrounding these civilizations is not and has never been a purely academic exercise. It is deeply embedded in the political and ideological currents of the last 2 centuries. The work of scholars like Diop was an explicit and necessary corrective to a colonial-era historiography that systematically denied or diminished the achievements of Black Africans, often attributing any sign of advanced civilization to external non-Black influence. To reclaim Kemet as a Black African civilization was a revolutionary act of re-ravelizing the African past and challenging the intellectual foundations of colonialism. Conversely, the academic debates that have ensued, such as the 1974 UNESCO Symposium in Cairo on the peopling of ancient Egypt, have often been arenas where political imperatives seem to clash with standards of academic rigor, demonstrating the high stakes involved for national, racial, and cultural identity. Acknowledging this context is essential for a nuanced understanding of how evidence has been interpreted, and why the question of civilizational continuity remains so potent. 1.2 Methodology and Scope. This report will employ a rigorous, comparative, and interdisciplinary methodology, drawing upon evidence from theology, cosmology, political science, art history, linguistics, and archaeology. It will meticulously present the parallels between the 3 civilizations before critically evaluating the theories that purport to explain them. The analysis will navigate a diverse and often conflicting body of sources, from the foundational but contextually bound histories of the early 20th century to the paradigm-shifting scholarship of the Afrocentric school, and the critiques and counter-theories of mainstream academic research. The ultimate goal is not to deliver a final verdict, but to provide a balanced and exhaustive synthesis, clarifying what can be reasonably inferred from the available evidence, and identifying where the lines between historical data, compelling theory, and ideological assertion are drawn. Section 2. Foundational Pillars. Outlines of the 3 civilizations. To establish a framework for comparison, it is essential to first outline the distinct historical, philosophical, and political characters of each civilization. While Kemet's temporal precedence is clear, the Yoruba and Igbo civilizations developed unique and sophisticated structures that defy simple categorization as derivative. 2.1. The Kemetic Worldview, Order from Chaos. The civilization of Kemet, which flourished in the Nile Valley for over 3 millennia, was built upon a profound and enduring cosmological vision. Its history is conventionally divided into major periods, beginning with the pre-dynastic c.430-3000 BCE, and the unification of the kingdom, followed by the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms, which represent peaks of cultural and political power. At the heart of the Kemetic worldview was a fundamental dualism. The fertile, life-giving black soil of the Nile floodplain was known as Kemet, the Black Land, from which the people took their name. This was perpetually contrasted with Deshret, the red land of the sterile and chaotic desert that surrounded them. This geographical reality was elevated to a core philosophical principle, the perpetual struggle between Ma'at, the divine order embodying truth, justice, balance, and cosmic law, and Isfet, the forces of chaos, disorder, and falsehood. The entire purpose of the state, religion, and the individual was to uphold Ma'at and keep Isfet at bay. This cosmic struggle was managed by the central figure of the pharaoh. The ruler of Kemet was no mere king. He was a divine intermediary, a being who straddled the terrestrial and celestial realms. Upon his accession to the throne, the human ruler embodied the eternal and divine office of kingship itself, becoming the living incarnation of the god Horus. He was the essential link between the gods and humanity, and his primary function was to perform the rituals necessary to maintain Mayat and ensure the continued stability and prosperity of the world. 2.2. The Yoruba Polities, a constellation of city-states. The Yoruba civilization, concentrated in the southwestern region of modern-day Nigeria, is distinguished by its history of sophisticated urbanism and its complex political and religious systems. Yoruba oral traditions and archaeological evidence point to the ancient city of Ile-Ife as the civilization's primordial center, its cultural and spiritual homeland, the cradle of Yoruba culture, and the very site where the world was created. By the 8th century CE, Ile-Ife was already a powerful kingdom, and it reached its artistic zenith, particularly in naturalistic bronze and terracotta sculpture, between 1200 and 1400 CE. The foundational myth of the Yoruba people centers on the figure of Oduduwa, who was regarded as the first divine king and the progenitor of the numerous royal dynasties that would follow. From the sacred center of Ile, princes are said to have dispersed to find other kingdoms, creating a constellation of city-states, each ruled by a hereditary sacred king known as an Oba. This political structure, characterized by a network of independent but spiritually linked kingdoms, led the Yoruba to become arguably the most urbanized African people of the pre-colonial era. Over time, some of these city-states grew into vast empires, most notably the Oyo Empire, which from the 17th century became a dominant military and political force in the region. 2.3. The Igbo Commonwealth, a theocratic and republican synthesis. The Igbo people, whose heartland lies in southeastern Nigeria, present a socio-political model that contrasts sharply with the monarchical structures of both Kemet and the Yoruba. Archaeological evidence suggests settlements in Igbo land dating back to at least 900 BCE, with a cultural core area identified in the Owerri, Orlu, Okigwe region, from which the population is believed to have expanded. The most notable early polity was the Kingdom of Nri, which rose around the 10th century CE. Nri was not a kingdom in the conventional sense of military or territorial power. It was a religio-polity, a unique theocratic state administered by a priest-king, the Eze Nri. The Eze held immense divine and ritual authority, responsible for spiritual matters and the cleansing of the land, but he wielded no military force. His influence spread through religious conversion and ritual allegiance, not conquest. Beyond the influence of Nri, traditional Igbo society was largely characterized by a democratic republican system of government. It was a highly decentralized society of autonomous towns and village groups where political authority was vested not in a single monarch, but in councils composed of lineage heads, elders, and other influential men. This republican ethos stands as a significant point of divergence from its neighbors. Evidence of the region's ancient wealth and sophistication is found in the remarkable 9th-11th century bronze artifacts unearthed at Igubu-Ukwu, which demonstrate a mastery of metallurgy and a complex artistic tradition. The foundational outlines of these three civilizations reveal a fascinating spectrum of political organization. Kemet represents a model of absolute centralized divine monarchy. The Yoruba developed a system of federated sacred monarchies, bound by a shared spiritual origin but politically distinct. The Igbo, in contrast, cultivated a largely decentralized republican system, overseen by a spiritual authority with ritual rather than political power. This very diversity presents an immediate challenge to any simplistic theory of cultural transformation. transplantation. A direct migration or wholesale adoption of the kemetic political model, for instance, struggles to account for the emergence of the distinctly non-monarchical republican traditions of the Igbo. This suggests that even if a core concept like sacred leadership was transmitted across the continent, it was profoundly reinterpreted, adapted, and in some cases rejected in favor of local socio-political realities, underscoring the dynamic agency of West African societies in shaping their own institutions. Section 3. The Divine and the Cosmos, a Comparative Theological Analysis. The spiritual and cosmological frameworks of Kemet, the Yoruba, and the Igbo reveal some of the most striking and detailed parallels, particularly in the hierarchical structure of their pantheons and the archetypal motifs of their creation myths. However, their conceptions of the soul and the afterlife show profound divergences that challenge theories of direct cultural transmission. 2.1. Pantheons and power structures. A tripartite framework. Despite their geographical and temporal separation, all three civilizations structured their divine worlds according to a remarkably similar tripartite framework, consisting of a remote supreme being, a pantheon of accessible lesser divinities, Kemetic Neteru. The Kemetic pantheon was presided over by a supreme creator god, often identified with the sun as Ra or Amun-Ra. While the ultimate source of power, this high god could be remote from the daily affairs of humanity. The primary focus of popular worship and state ritual was on the vast pantheon of other gods and goddesses, the Neteru, such as Osiris, lord of the underworld. Her goddess is Gordo, the divine prototype of the pharaoh. The deities manage specific aspects of creation, nature, and human life. Ancestors were revered, particularly within the royal cult, but the gods and the divine pharaoh remained the central foci of the religious system. Yoruba Orishas. Historical program. His manual posits a single transcendent supreme being, Olodumare, who is the owner of the heavens and the ultimate source of all existence. Olodumare is generally considered too remote and elevated for direct worship, and has no dedicated priests or cult groups. Instead, spiritual life revolves around the Orishas, a vast pantheon of secondary divinities who act as intermediaries between Olodumare and humanity. Each Orisha, Batu Pisango, the god of thunder, Ogun, the god of iron and war, Eshu, the divine messenger, governs specific natural forces and domains of human experience. Alongside the Orishas, the veneration of ancestors is a cornerstone of Yoruba belief, embodied in the Egungun masquerades that represent the spirits of the dead returning to the community. Ibu Alusi. The Igbo likewise believe in a supreme creator god, known as Chukwu or Chineke. While also transcendent, Chukwu is often perceived as more immanent and directly involved in the daily lives of individuals compared to the Yoruba Olodumare. The active spiritual forces in the world are the Alusi, a host of other deities and spirits, many of whom are associated with natural elements. Preeminent among them is Allah, the earth goddess, who is a central figure in Igbo morality and custom. As with the Yoruba, ancestors are crucial intermediaries between the living and the spiritual world, and their veneration is a fundamental aspect of religious practice. The structural parallel is undeniable. A distant high god delegates authority to a pantheon of active specialized divinities who are the primary recipients of worship, with ancestors serving as respected and essential mediators. This shared hierarchical model suggests a common conceptual grammar for organizing the divine world. 3.2. Myths of creation. Echoes of the primordial water. The creation myths of Kemet and the Yoruba share a powerful and specific central motif, the emergence of the first habitable land from a formless primordial ocean. Kemetic cosmogony. All major Kemetic creation myths, despite their variations, begin with the same premise. The world arose out of the lifeless, chaotic waters of a primeval ocean called Nu. The first act of creation was the emergence of a pyramid-shaped mound of earth, the Benben, from these waters. This event, likely inspired by the annual inundation of the Nile which left fertile mounds of silt as it receded, symbolized the triumph of order over chaos. From this first mound the sun god, Atum or Ra, appeared and initiated the process of creation, generating the first pair of gods, Shu and Tefnut, moisture. Yoruba cosmogony. The Yoruba creation myth also begins with a world consisting only of a sky above and a vast expanse of water and marshland below. The supreme being, Olodumare, tasks a deity, either Obatala or in other versions Ududua, with creating solid land. The deity descends from the heavens on a golden chain and pours sand from a snail's shell onto the primordial water. A five-to-oid hen then scratches at the sand, spreading it to form the first land. This sacred spot where creation began is identified as the city of Ili-Ife. The conceptual overlap is profound. Both narratives feature creation ex aqua, a beginning from a watery chaos. Furthermore, both pinpoint a specific sacred location, the Benben Mound in Kemet, Ili-Ife in Yorubaland, as the axis mundi, the primordial point from which the ordered world expanded. The presence of this specific motif in both the deltaic, riverine culture of Kemet and the forested inland culture of the Yoruba is highly significant. It suggests that this is not merely a localized interpretation of geography like the Nile flood, but may represent an incredibly ancient shared African cosmological archetype that predates the formation of both distinct cultures. This points away from a simple model of direct transmission from Kemet to Yorubaland and towards a much deeper common heritage. 3.3. Conceptions of the soul and afterlife, divergent paths to eternity. In stark contrast to the parallels in cosmology, the beliefs surrounding the soul and the afterlife reveal a fundamental divergence between Kemet and the West African civilizations. This difference presents a formidable challenge to theories of direct cultural descent. The Kemetic conception of the afterlife was a complex linear journey. The soul was believed to be composed of multiple parts, including the Ka, life force, and the Ba, personality/spirit, which were separated at death. Essential tenet was the absolute necessity of preserving the physical body through intricate mummification, as it was believed the soul would need to reunite with it in the afterlife. Upon death, the deceased embarked on a perilous journey through the underworld, guided by spells from texts like the Book of the Dead. The journey culminated in the weighing of the heart ceremony, where the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was light with good deeds, the individual was granted eternal life in the realm of Osiris. If it was heavy with sin, it was devoured by a demon, and the soul was annihilated. Yoruba and Igbo worldviews are dominated by the concept of cyclical existence, not a linear one-way journey. For both cultures, death is not an end but a transition to another state of being, a passage to the realm of the ancestors. The core belief is in reincarnation, Ilo Ua, in Igbo, which is seen as a desirable and natural process. The spirit of a deceased person is expected to return to its lineage, being reborn in a newborn child of the same family. The Igbo in particular view this as an opportunity for the soul to continue to improve its status over multiple lifetimes. Consequently, while proper burial rites are essential to ensure the spirit becomes a beneficent ancestor, the Igbo Ikwa Uzu, or second burial, being a crucial, lavish ceremony for this purpose, the preservation of the physical corpse through mummification is entirely absent. This fundamental schism in eschatology is perhaps the most powerful argument against the simple migration or diffusion model. Beliefs about death, the soul, and what comes after are among the most deeply entrenched and culturally conservative elements in any society. It is difficult to conceive of a significant population movement from Kemet that would completely abandon its elaborate and central Osirian afterlife doctrines, including mummification and the judgment of the soul, in favor of a radically different system based on reincarnation. This profound theological divergence strongly suggests either a point of cultural separation in the extremely distant past long before the codification of the Osirian cult, or, more likely, the independent development of these core spiritual beliefs within a West African context. Section 4. The Sacred Ruler, Divine Kingship in Kemet, Yorubaland and Igboland. The institution of sacred kingship provides one of the most compelling and detailed areas of correlation between the three civilizations. While the political expression of this leadership varied dramatically, the underlying ideology and the ritual processes for creating a divine ruler share a structural logic that suggests a deep historical connection. 4.1. Comparative ideologies of rule Pharaoh as God on earth. The Kemetic pharaoh was the ultimate expression of divine kingship. He was not merely a king who was sacred or divinely appointed. He was understood to be a god incarnate. In life he was the manifestation of Horus, the son of Osiris. In death he became Osiris, the resurrected lord of the underworld. His divine status was the bedrock of the state, and his primary role was the cosmic maintenance of Ma'at through ritual performance. This was reflected in his extensive royal titularies, which explicitly connected him to the gods, to military power, and to the very land of Egypt itself. Oba, as deputy of the gods, the Yoruba Oba, is also a sacred figure. But his divinity is conceptualized differently. Oba is also a sacred figure, but his divinity is conceptualized differently. He is not a god incarnate in the Kemetic sense, but is considered the second in command to the deity, Aleta Umkiji Orisa. He is a vessel for divine power and the living representative of the founding ancestor, Oduduwa. As the custodian of the people's culture and the head of all religious cults, his person is sacred, and he serves as the crucial link between the community and the spiritual world of the Orishas and ancestors. Enri, as priest king. The Is Enri of the Igbo represents a third model, one of purely spiritual and ritualistic authority. He was a divine ruler whose power was mystical, not military. His primary function was to act as a spiritual intermediary, cleansing the land of abominations, Osak, and maintaining cosmic harmony through ritual. Upon his installation, the Ize Nyo underwent a profound transformation, ceasing to be an ordinary man and becoming a spirit, Uol, a being set apart and subject to numerous ritual prohibitions. His authority was respected over a wide swath of Igbo land, but it was a religious influence, not a political or military dominion. 4.2 Rites of Passage, Coronation and Installation Rituals. Despite the differing ideologies of rule, the ritual processes for investing these rulers with sacred power exhibit a stunning sequence of shared themes. This suggests a common technology of sacred kingship, a blueprint for transforming a mortal man into a divine vessel. Supernatural selection. In all three traditions, the future ruler cannot simply inherit the throne by primogeniture. He must be supernaturally chosen. The Yoruba obelect is confirmed by the Ifa oracle, the divine system of divination. The future Izeni must manifest signs and wonders, prophesy, or be identified in dreams, proving he is the choice of God, Chukwu, the ancestors, and the spirits. This echoes the Kemetic belief that the gods endorsed the rightful pharaoh. Seclusion and transformation. Following selection, the candidate undergoes a period of ritual seclusion. The Yoruba obelect is taken to a special location where he is taught the sacred history, traditions, and secrets of the kingdom, familiarizing himself with his new role as a spiritual leader. This period marks his transition from the profane to the sacred world. Symbolic death and rebirth. This theme is central to the sacralization process. The installation of the Izi Enri is the most explicit example, involving a mock burial in a shallow grave. After being exhumed, the candidate is considered ritually dead to his old life and is reborn as a spirit, Mwa. His family home is abandoned, and his tree of life is cut down, signifying a complete break with his mortal existence. Similarly, the Yoruba Oba is ritually transformed beyond an ordinary man. This entire complex of death and resurrection is profoundly resonant with the Osirian myth, which formed the mythological basis for pharaonic succession. The deceased king becomes Osiris, and his living son becomes Horus. Ritual journeys. The installation process often involves a symbolic journey that reenacts the founding of the kingdom. The Ize elect must travel to Agulari, the ancestral homeland of the Igbo, to obtain a sacred lump of clay from the bed of the Anambra River. This act is essential for his consecration and connects him directly to the primordial founder Eri. Ritual consumption. A powerful and unique parallel is found in the Yoruba tradition, where the Oba elect is said to consume the heart of his predecessor. This act of ritual cannibalism is not about sustenance, but about the direct, physical transference of the dynasty's sacred power, and the continuity of the royal spirit. As he eats, he is asked, "What did you eat?" And he replies, "I ate the king," signifying his complete assumption of the office. Investiture with regalia. The culmination of these rites is the public coronation, where the new ruler is presented with the sacred regalia that symbolizes his office. For the Yoruba Oba, these include the great beaded crown, Ada, which spiritually connects him to the Orishas, the royal horsetail whisk, Hirikiri, and the sword of justice, Ada. The Izenari, the key items are rawhide crown and the sacred staff of authority, known as the Ofo. This act of investiture parallels the crowning of the pharaoh with the various crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, and the presentation of the crook and flail, symbols of his divine authority. The intricate and systematic nature of these shared ritual elements of selection, seclusion, symbolic death, journey, and investiture is highly unlikely to be the product of independent invention. The sequence forms a coherent and complex technology for manufacturing sacred authority. This represents one of the strongest pieces of evidence for a deep historical connection between the Nile Valley and West Africa, suggesting either a common origin for the entire ideological complex of divine kingship or a period of significant cultural transmission in the distant past that carried this specific blueprint across the continent. Section 5. Echoes in form. Iconographic and artistic correlations. The artistic traditions of Kemet, The Yoruba and the Igbo provide another fertile ground for comparative analysis, revealing shared symbolic vocabularies and technological approaches that suggest historical interaction, even if its exact nature remains debated. 5.1. The language of symbols. Certain powerful symbols recur across these cultures, carrying remarkably similar meanings related to divinity, royalty, and cosmic power. The ram. The ram is a potent symbol of divine power and leadership in both the Nile Valley and southern Nigeria. In Kemet and its southern neighbor Nubia, the ram was a primary animal manifestation of the supreme state god, Amun-Ra. This association was so strong that Nubian rulers were often depicted with ram iconography. Strikingly, in the arts of the Yoruba kingdom of Owo, as well as in Benin and Igbo land, the ram's head is a recurrent motif symbolizing chieftaincy, ancestral power, and spiritual authority. A detailed iconographic and stylistic analysis of a 16th century Owo pectoral mask reveals profound similarities to Nubian jewelry associated with the cult of Amun, suggesting a shared conceptual source. The use of this specific animal to denote supreme spiritual and temporal power is a significant parallel that points toward a historical connection, with Nubia potentially acting as a cultural intermediary. The serpent. The serpent is a universally powerful symbol, often embodying dualistic concepts. In Kemet, this duality was explicit. The serpent could represent the ultimate force of chaos, the demon Apophis who threatened the sun god's nightly journey, or it could symbolize divine protection, royalty, and legitimacy in the form of the Uraeus, the rearing cobra on the pharaoh's brow, which was the emblem of the goddess Wajet. This potent symbolism of the serpent as a being of both creative and destructive power is a widespread mythological archetype found globally. While the specific manifestations differ, the serpent's association with primordial power and spiritual authority is a shared theme in West African cosmology as well. Avian motifs. Birds served as crucial messengers and symbols of divine power in both regions. Kemetic religion associated specific birds with major deities. The falcon was the embodiment of the sky gods Horus and Ra. The ibis was the sacred animal of Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, and the vulture was the symbol of the protective goddess Nekbet. In Yoruba art, birds are also of paramount importance, most notably appearing atop the beaded crowns of the obas. These birds represent the connection to the spiritual realm, and are also understood as symbols of the mystical power of the mothers. A Ya-wun, Ya-mi, a term for elderly women, ancestors, and witches. In both cultures, the ability to traverse the boundary between earth and sky makes the bird a fitting symbol for spiritual vision and otherworldly power. The Ankh. The Ankh, the Kemetic hieroglyph for life, is one of the most iconic symbols of the ancient world, often called the key of life. It represented eternal life and was frequently depicted being held by deities who offered it to the pharaoh, bestowing upon him the breath of life. While there is no evidence of the Ankh's use in ancient Yoruba or Igbo art, its modern adoption by Coptic Christians as the Crox Ansata, a variation of the cross, and its embrace in the 20th century as a pan-African symbol of shared heritage and cultural identity demonstrate its enduring power and its perceived connection to a broader African spiritual legacy. 5.2. Technological and stylistic parallels beyond shared symbols. There are notable parallels in artistic technology and aesthetic principles. Sophisticated metallurgy, the discovery of the Igbo-Yugu bronzes dating to the 9th, 11th centuries CE, and the later masterpieces from Ife in the 13th, 14th centuries revealed a stunningly advanced knowledge of metallurgy, particularly the lost wax Kiri Purdue casting technique. The technical virtuosity and intricate detail of these works were so high that early 20th century scholars, operating under colonial biases, initially assumed the technology must have been imported from outside Africa, with Egypt being a proposed source. This assumption, however, is a prime example of how historical bias can shape interpretation. Naturalism in sculpture. The art of If is celebrated for its refined and sensitive naturalism, particularly in its terracotta and brass heads that depict rulers and other important figures. This aesthetic focus on lifelike, idealized portraiture provides a point of comparison with certain periods of Kemetic art, particularly the sculpture of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, which also valued idealized naturalism in its depiction of royalty and the elite. The early scholarly tendency to attribute the technological sophistication of Igbo Ukwu and Ife to external influence is now being critically re-evaluated. Archaeologists are increasingly exploring the strong possibility that West Africans developed ironworking and advanced bronze casting technologies autonomously, with a potential lineage stretching back to the earlier Nok culture, C05A. Cultural access has widespread effect, but continuity seems special. Autonomous Orion founded Pono Beach, Peru to fund Pono Beach, Peru for decades by marrying Wangho Taimer, Otaiber, and Onau, one of Peru's first founders. Autonomous Adita Wuth in Otamer Utinu Aruhar. This shift in perspective is crucial. It reframes the question from a simplistic, where did they learn this, to a more nuanced, what were the local conditions and long history of innovation that allowed for this mastery? In this light,